Good morning. How's everyone doing today? Wonderful panel, the last one. Awesome. So today we're talking about Brightline and the future of rail and how that becomes a catalyst for economic development. So Patrick, his bio is in the app. I'm not going to go through that. We don't want to waste any time. But why now? Why now?
So, good morning, everybody. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here with all of you today. So, why now? It is way past due. This is a country that, while Europe and Asia invested in their intercity passenger rail systems after the Second World War, the U.S. decided we were all going to drive a car. And we all kind of threw our hands up in the air, gave up our rail networks, and started driving and invested into highways, passed the Federal Highway Act. And here we are 60 years later, 70 years later, and our highways are now congested, and we've given up access to a lot of these rights of way that were critical for intercity passenger rail service. So we had an opportunity, because we already owned the Florida East Coast Railroad that ran from Jacksonville down to Key West at one point. So our project started on third base, and we had that infrastructure already. We invested about $6 billion into the system between Miami and West Palm Beach. And we're now running the first privately owned intercity passenger rail in the United States that's been developed in the last guy to do it was Henry Flagler 125 years ago. So I think it's way past due. And you can see from our numbers, we're already carrying, in March, we carried about 330,000 passengers, and we're on our way to carrying 4 million people this year.
So as far as a business model, how do you make this sustainable and working with, public-private partnership?
So Brightline, Florida is unique in that it was completely privately funded. So our sponsor is a private equity firm, Fortress Investment Group. We were able to take advantage of some tax-exempt municipal bonds to finance the project. Those are bonds that you get through the different municipalities. But that's how we got it done. These are very capital-intensive businesses, so difficult to do. From our perspective, what we needed from the government was help with permitting and access. The government has a real superpower in terms of providing permits for projects like this. Otherwise, it can be a very long. We're working on a project between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, connecting trains between LA and Vegas at 200 miles per hour, Brightline West. That project has taken $500 million just to get to the starting line. So these projects are very capital intensive, and you need a lot of help from the government to get your project permitted and on a path. You also need, to get access to the right of way. So here in Florida, for example, we had the corridor, and you can see it on the map from Miami all the way to Jacksonville, but we didn't have that connection into Orlando, so we were able to work with the state at that time to get access to the 528 expressway to get into the Orlando station. So that's really where the government collaboration came into play, was, okay, how do we get access to this right of way? We work with the Orlando airport to lease some space at the Orlando airport to locate our train station. Those are some of the ways that we've worked with the government. And then now that we've been operational for a while, we've been able to get some grants from the government to improve the safety on the corridor. So there's lots of different ways that the government can help and facilitate, but ultimately, all of it was up to us to raise the capital. I think that's going to change, though, in the future. In most other countries, if you look at Europe or Asia, the government is responsible for developing the infrastructure. So they make that investment, and then it's the operators that purchase and operate the trains and cover the cost of operations. But stations and infrastructure typically are not paid for by the operator. They're part of what the government's responsibility is. And I think that's where we're going to need to go as a country over the next decade or so to enable more intercity passenger rail.
So speaking of intercity and working with the government, Brightline was never meant to be a commuter product, but you do have an opportunity now working with cities about bringing their services, commuter rail, to cities. How is that partnership working out?
So because we've built this infrastructure, this is brand new infrastructure, double track running from Miami all the way up through the state. One of the things that Brightline has done in this state is it has catalyzed more conversations about transportation and mobility and how do we create alternatives to the car. Back in the day when we started Brightline, I had this very aspirational vision that we could create a car-free lifestyle. That was a little bit too aspirational. So I think now what we're trying to accomplish is more of a car alternative lifestyle. So because we already have this infrastructure running from Miami to Palm Beach, we have excess capacity, which we are going to essentially sell to each of the counties of Miami-Dade, Broward County, and Palm Beach County so that they can deploy commuter rail. So Brightline really is the spine that connects all of the major cities throughout the state of Florida. It connects about 10 million residents in the state. All of the different counties are leveraging that spine to create commuter rail. So for example, in Miami, just between Miami Station and Aventura, there will be 5 additional stations serving neighborhoods like Wynwood, the Design District, Magic City, FIU, et cetera. So this is going to enhance mobility for millions of people living in Miami. And similarly in Broward, we're looking at building about 8 stations in Broward County, and then Palm Beach ultimately would have 10 to 12 stations. And those stations would use our tracks. They would be able to stop at our stations, but then there would be 5 to 10 interstitial stations between each Brightline station. So that way you can get on this train, you can traverse the 3 counties, and you can get on and off at Brightline stations and jump off a commuter rail train and jump onto an intercity passenger train.
For a fraction of the cost.
That's right.
Yeah. So
and that would be a fully subsidized service similar to Metro Rail or Tri-Rail, our Sunrail. By the way, we're doing a similar project in Central Florida. When we expand to Tampa and we connect from the Orlando airport through I-Drive and onwards to Tampa, Sunrail is looking to leverage that infrastructure that will exist between the airport and Disney to be able to expand its Sunrail service. So those projects are all in progress,
yep.
And I think will make a meaningful impact, transformational impact on mobility in our state.
now let's talk about real estate development. So TODs. How has Brightline been a catalyst for that sort of product?
Well, I think that it's endemic particularly in rail. To see transit-oriented development. You're moving millions of people. You're providing them access to this network that can get you all over the state. We developed about $1 billion worth of real estate around our stations, primarily at Miami Central. But if you look adjacent to Miami Central, for example, at World Center, they've invested, close to $4 billion. I think it's catalyzed about 10 million square feet of real estate development around the Miami station. And that has been the case as well, primarily in Palm Beach County as well. We're seeing it happen now in Aventura. Boca is redeveloping their whole town center around the station. So people understand that having the adjacency to an intercity passenger rail service is really an incentive for people. By the way, we also have been able to change the zoning around these stations, and we've come up with this rapid transit zoning, which allows people more density, less parking. And that, of course, has incentivized people to build more around these stations. But there's a lot of that happening as well if you live in South Miami along the Metro Rail stations as well. That's really starting to kick off now. You're seeing a lot of density coming up and creating this, 15-minute city environment where people can walk out the door. Everything is available to them, and then they can jump on a train and get access to whether it's healthcare, amenities, restaurants, entertainment, you name it.
So Brightline being the first private rail product in 100 years, for the next 100 years, thinking about your kids and for those who have, kids or, loved ones, when you talk about the ecology of things and nature adaptive solutions, where do you see Brightline being a force for having this change, reducing cars, and having more walkability in neighborhoods? Say, for instance, with a transit-oriented development, what does your footprint look like, and how can you help to support this narrative around ecological adaptive design?
Well, I think that the conversations that Brightline has catalyzed are going to lead to, in addition to the commuter rail project that I just described, if you look at a map of the state of Florida, the density isn't just around the downtowns anymore. It now extends east-west. And if anybody lives out west, trying to get from the west of the state to the east of the state is painful. Like getting from anywhere to anywhere in Miami or Palm Beach now takes like an hour. So I think step one was to develop Brightline and create that spine throughout the state. Step two is to create intercity, commuter rail, where there are 5 to 10 stations within each county on that north-south axis. And I think step three is to start connecting east-west corridors, and they could be light rail, they could be express buses, BRT, they can be there's systems like glideways and others that are emerging now that are more affordable and faster to deploy. So I think you're going to start to see a lot of these projects that were kind of put on hold. You're already seeing those conversations start. And I think that that's going to promote this car alternative lifestyle, which is going to lead to people living, I think it's a quality of life thing. Rather than, spending 2 hours each way in your commute, getting home and wanting to kick the dog, you can actually have a pleasant commute to work and back from work. It's easy to get to attractions. I was just saying to Andrew before we sat down here, we live in Miami. When's the last time you went to Broward for leisure? Never, right? Or very rarely. And that is not because Broward doesn't have a lot to offer. It's just because it's not accessible. It's not easy to get there. So I think that having these car alternative options will be transformative for people from a quality of life perspective, but it also gives you access to better, healthcare alternatives, educational alternatives. It's going to cover the whole spectrum of your life. It really is transformative because now you have options that just weren't possible before if you had to navigate this by car. And then, of course, transportation and housing are completely interdependent. And being able to connect people to jobs, and get them to affordable housing within the region so that they can live somewhere where they can afford and still work in these great places in our downtowns is something that we all need to be working towards.
Now, in Brightline West, you guys are using the median, I understand, to put down rail. Is that something in the future that can be done in Miami or any other municipality within the Tri-County area to accomplish, especially our east to west corridors?
Definitely. I mean, I think that the hardest thing to obtain when you're trying to build mass transportation is the right-of-way. And there is plenty of right-of-way. It's about making the decision to prioritize it for mass transit. So if you can take a lane of an east-west corridor and use it for bus rapid transit, or something at grade. Building at grade is a fraction of the price of building things on an elevated basis. So, for example, the Metro Mover, an incredible service downtown, it's all elevated. That costs 5 times what it costs to put it on the ground. So where we can use existing transportation corridors and leverage those for mass transit at grade, those are going to be the easiest, fastest, and most affordable corridors to execute on. And even if you got to elevate in certain places, you got to get through an overpass or an underpass or over a body of water. Those are the opportunities that we're going to be looking at, and that a lot of the municipalities are already looking at to try and enhance mobility on those east-west corridors.
Now, we kind of want to touch on this briefly. I know it's like kind of a topic. I'm not sure how you want to address this, but I'm sure folks want to know how will you guys eventually make money, right? That's always a question. So
yes,
if you don't mind addressing that.
Sure. So I just mentioned that in March we carried 330,000 passengers. Average fare was about $80. The company is already covering its costs, and intercity passenger rail globally is profitable. You might not believe this, but the Acela in the Northeast, that service generates anywhere between $300 and $500 million a year in EBITDA. So the long-term projections for Brightline are exactly in line with those types of systems. And you can look at Italo, you can look at, in Italy, you can look at Eurostar, you can look at Avanti, you can look at Renfe. There are a number of services globally that are highly profitable. The good thing about intercity passenger rail is, the bad thing is it's very capital intensive. And you've got to raise a lot of money to be able to build these things. The good news is the expenses are very fixed in nature. So once you get past break even, every dollar you make after that flows to the bottom line at almost 90%. So it really is about getting the volume. And I think what we've been doing over the last few years since we opened Orlando service in 2023 is ramping up that volume. And as I mentioned, we're north of 300,000 passengers now, and the company's breaking even. We just need to continue hammering away at that. And I mean, we're very optimistic about the future of Brightline. It has a net promoter score in the high 70s. Our on-time performance is 95%, which is the best in the country. It is the industry's best in the United States of America. That net promoter score is equivalent to like Four Seasons or Ritz-Carlton. People love the product. People love the service. We have only penetrated a very, very small number of the Florida resident market. I would say sub 10%. So we just need to continue chipping away at it. And there are lots of people who haven't taken the train yet. And we've had some barriers. We had some capacity constraints over the last couple of years. We just added 30 more coaches. For 2024 and most of 2025, a third of our trains were sold out. We didn't have any room to accommodate the demand. So we added 30 more coaches. We put those trains into service at the end of last year, and we're now starting to fill those trains up again. It's a little bit of a peaky business, so you got to figure out how to put the capacity in the right places. But we are on a path to making the business very profitable. We're very optimistic about the future. And then we also have upside in terms of the stations that we plan to add. We're adding a station in Stewart. We're adding a station in Cocoa. And then eventually we're going to expand to Tampa, which we think will be, have a significant impact on top and bottom line.
So speaking of ridership, how do sport events, entertainment factor into to that?
I mean, you guys might have read some of the articles about how successful transit was for the recent Inter-Miami game at Freedom Park. And like, these are the kinds of stories you want to start getting out there. People need to start recognizing, that this is the way to get around, particularly for large sporting events. And when we're looking at our calendar of events and we're planning and forecasting for the year, we look, we live in an incredible state. I mean, you've got NBA, NFL, MLS, hockey, Formula One, and that's on top of Art Basel, boat shows, food and wine, etc. These events are massive demand generators. And, a lot of these venues don't have enough parking. We all know the parking situation, at Marlins or at the Heat Stadium or at Dolphin Stadium are very, very challenging. So we're working collaboratively with those venues to figure out how do we become part of that solution? How do we take 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 cars out of their parking lots and put people on trains and shuttles instead? So we have very deep partnerships with all of these event venues throughout the state of Florida. And we continue to build on those opportunities. But it's an exciting time to live here. There's so much happening. And with the World Cup coming up here in the summer, we're already very deep into planning on that. But we're doing it collaboratively with Tri-Rail, with Metro Rail, with Miami-Dade County on buses and shuttles and all the rest of it. And, there's going to be some media coming out explaining how all of that's going to work very soon. But this is how we have to adapt because, getting everybody there in a car is just no longer going to be feasible.
So in closing, approaching, how does one engage? Mayors, folks who are in power, the decision makers, how do they engage with Brightline to partner with you to build together if this is something that they are interested in for their region?
So, we're not the solution for everybody. A lot of people kind of knock on the door, on the door, and they're like, "We need a station in our town." You've got to really identify in your municipality, in your region, in your community, what are the problems you're trying to solve. And, Brightline's not always going to be the solution, but as we continue to develop our service and we add in these commuter rail stations, municipalities should be talking to us and to their respective counties about how they can connect to that overall network, so that we end up with, I'm envisioning at some point in the not too distant future, particularly in South Florida, more of a grid system where we've got, we're going to cover the north-south, but now how do we get all this east-west transportation going and get all those connections going so that we can truly become a car alternative community?
I want to thank you very much for your time today. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.